Hello and welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your weekly libertarian review of news and culture from the editors of Reason magazine. If you are tired of the terrible choices offered by today's politics, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Matt Welch, and Nick Gillespie. Happy Monday, gang. You believe in limited government, and you support organizations that champion the ideals of a free society. But have you ensured that your charitable giving will leave a lasting legacy of liberty? Without a plan in place, your charitable legacy could fade, or worse, be redirected to causes that don't align with your values. At Donors Trust, we help you secure your philanthropic vision for the long term. With a donor-advised fund, you can ensure that the groups you care about continue to receive support even beyond your lifetime. And unlike other donor-advised funds, Donors Trust respects your libertarian principles and ensures your charitable capital remains committed to advancing individual liberty. Your giving should reflect your values, not just today, but for years to come. Your vision, your values, your impact. Go to donorstrust.org/reason to ensure your philanthropy continues to champion liberty for generations to come. That's donorstrust.org/reason. Alrighty, our AI future is here, and the MAGA populists are against it, and they're wrong. And what's funny is President Donald Trump is right on this one. So last week we had NatCon, the annual conference for national conservatism in Washington, D.C. There was a speech by Republican Senator Josh Hawley. It was a big anti-A speech in which he declared that artificial intelligence threatens the common man's liberty. Katherine, I'm going to start with you because you like liberty and robots. So is liberty compatible with artificial intelligence?
It absolutely is. And Josh Hawley can just get right out of here with his attitude. So here's the thing. I
think you might have been about to say something else there.
I was, but it was the top of the podcast. It's Monday. It's a fresh week. I'm trying to be good. Okay, so he starts out with the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is annoying for like 17 different reasons. But then he says that tech innovations are one-way power transfers to the elite. And I think that is the most laughable of many of his laughable assertions in this speech. Decentralization, democratization of communications and banking and labor and travel and all the stuff that has been made possible by new tech is, as Josh Hawley would call it, a miracle. I wouldn't call it that. I would just say it's people working together to do good stuff. But AI is good for people and liberty and America, and Josh Hawley is wrong per usual.
Nick, so one of the targets of Hawley's speech was self-driving cars and self-driving trucks. And the quote that I just want to read you is, "Most jobs should be reserved for humans. Only humans should drive cars and trucks." And that sounds awfully familiar to me because it's basically what the unions and the left-leaning activists and urban planners have been saying in the Boston area as they attempt to block self-driving cars. And I just it's fascinating to me to see that the populist MAGA right and the labor anti-corporate left are aligning here, not just on goals, but on language. And so I just want to ask you, how did we end up with this particular anti-AI horseshoe?
It's nice to mention horseshoes because there was a time when I suspect Josh Hawley or his, forebearers would have said, people should not drive cars because they should only be dragged around by horses and carriages. This is just... conservatives exist to stand athwart history, yelling stop. And Josh Hawley has done this, and I think national conservatives are. One of the things that I find interesting throughout this is also that he talked about in his speech about how AI threatens the common man's liberty. And also he spent a lot of time attacking transhumanism as rejecting the common man's worth. He seems to not like technology that allows people to do things that he doesn't think they should be doing. And I think that extends not just to, vehicles and things like that, but also to women having control over their bodies and the types of medical interventions that have allowed people to more than double their lifespans over the past 100 years. So in a way, this is of a perfect piece with a conservative message that cannot see past the present moment and can only see any change as a loss to whatever shreds of dignity are still kicking around there. So, how did we get there? It is probably that Josh Hawley does not see a future that he can see himself living in.
But it's not just the MAGA populists. It's like the thing that sort of was interesting to me was, Josh Hawley has been an anti-tech guy as long as he has been in politics. That has been his message is video games, social media, the internet, all of it's bad, and it's especially bad for families and children. But think about the way he's talking about jobs here. I'm going to read you a quote. This isn't just about jobs either. You cannot teach empathy or instinct to an autonomous vehicle. That's not Josh Hawley, though. That is a Teamsters rep in Boston, and that's interchangeable.
Yeah, but it's also the fact that, with Josh Hawley, it is simply he does not like technology. So he's going to be like that, where it pairs up with, people in industries that are threatened by change, such as trucking. Hawley also talks about Uber drivers and things like that. That's where the matchup comes. The sad thing is that when you look at a future of autonomous vehicles, which is going to take much longer to, come into being, than most of the projections indicate and the doomsayers worry about, they will be safer. And it's not as if today's truck drivers in 25 years will, have to learn an entire new industry. But the point is also, if you care about human beings and if you care about basic things like safety, you should be rooting for autonomous vehicles, because they're going to massively, minimize the number of traffic fatalities and accidents.
As someone who just started teaching her eldest daughter to drive, I'm rooting for autonomous vehicles now more than ever. And I think that a self-driving car would really help me with empathy and other human things. Yeah. If I
it's not too late to move to Saudi Arabia, Catherine.
Yeah.
I do want to bring Matt in here because he's our technology correspondent, right? Look, part of what's interesting about this Hawley speech is that it happened at NatCon, which is like MAGA home base. These people are Trump fans. And yet Trump has pushed AI pretty aggressively. I mean, just last week, there was a dinner that he had with Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook, both of whom, the CEOs of Meta and Google, both of whom are very invested in AI, right? He put out a press release bragging about how he is harnessing artificial intelligence to propel the U.S. to the forefront of global innovation. He's got a whole big AI plan. And yet after that dinner, there was a photo from the event that Laura Loomer tweeted out with the caption, "There isn't a single Trump supporter who is going to be happy to see this photo tonight." So this seems like a real wedge between Trump and the MAGA coalition. What does that tell you, Matt Welch?
I mean, I see the NatCon people as this long-running, elaborate attempt to translate Trumpism into kind of a governing ideology. J.D. Vance is, in many ways, along with Josh Hawley, kind of the leading avatar of this. And so they are translating this into, politics in general tends to try to translate social anxieties into political power and resentments. And so okay, we resent these tech overlords. The social anxiety is real. You mentioned Josh Hawley saying that, people are kind of dissatisfied with what's happening with their teens on the phones, and the internet isn't as fun as it used to be, and Google kind of sucks. All that's true. And people are trying to work through this sort of generation of technology and, recasting what was a much more kind of fun, wide open internet of the 90s and early aughts into whatever it is that they're going now. But, Trump doesn't necessarily have as solidified thought about political philosophy as the people who are trying to fill in the blanks of Trumpism. And so he, and since he's accumulating power like crazy and becoming, the leading avatar of FDR conservatism, if he changes his mind, like on that TikTok ban, well, he just changes his mind because he has the power now and he's not going to enforce this law. So there's going to be a little bit of dissonance that crops up here and there. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to be like a major wedge issue between these people necessarily. I would point to that Josh Hawley, just to underline the point of how far afield modern conservatism is away from the older style version of it. It's not just that he wants to prevent automation of cars. It's that he wants to, what's this phrase? We must guarantee the right of every American to pursue a vocation. Huh? What are we talking about now? We're guaranteeing that, where he wants to add this really super onerous requirements of AI companies, but maybe all tech companies to report to the government every time that their technology replaces a single job. Boy, that sounds like a lot of trust in the institution of government, which is not where, Reagan conservatism was at all. So he's asking for, and a lot of the NatCon people are absolutely upfront excited about adding these kind of requirements and power, aggrandizing power to the government. And in that sense, it's perfectly consistent with Trump, because Trump is out there bragging about all the power that he's accumulated. The White House yesterday posted a tweet bragging about how, he's signed the most executive orders since FDR. Great. So that, I think, is the broader thing of where they're at. You're going to see occasional dissonance between the people who are trying to do Trumpism, but he's sui generis. He's only Trump. And if he really decides that AI is great and Josh Hawley is full of beans, then Josh Hawley will recede, because Trump is the one who has the power, and especially Republicans in Congress are absolutely powerless to do anything about it by their own hand.
I mean, it's ironic that he mentions Uber in all of this, given that Uber was the big bugaboo for cab drivers and others about 15 years ago when it came on the scene, and it kind of went around some of the regulations, just said, we're just going to start doing business and then you can try and stop us. And it's, Josh Hawley of 2008, 2010, whenever it was that Uber started operating, probably would have been against Uber. And now he is trying to lock it in place via the law. But Katherine, I want to ask you about something Matt said, which is about social anxiety. And there is a lot of social anxiety around AI, around sort of new technologies. And last week on this podcast, I wasn't here, but I listened. It was a good show. Thank you for hosting, Matt. You talked about how when you want to make an argument, Katherine, when you're talking to people who you disagree with, the thing you try to do is just be normal. And now that's hard for some of us who maybe weren't on the podcast last week. And it can be especially hard on this issue because so many people, I think, like Hawley, maybe not in as strong terms, but like Josh Hawley, see this technology as abnormal, as a violation of nature. And maybe even there's at least one person, including technology correspondent Matt Welch, who kind of feels a little bit like that on this podcast. So can you just try to make the normal person argument for AI to everybody who is uncomfortable with it?
Hey, Katherine, good morning. Be normal. Sure, I can do it. I think the normal person argument is we have actually been here before. We have been here dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And we're going to do what we always do when this happens, when we get a new technology that feels like it is the edge of some form of our humanity, whether that's IVF or the early days of the internet, or as you say, Uber, that moment when the internet pivoted from never tell anyone who you are on the internet to tell a stranger who you are on the internet and then get in his car. And that thing always feels scary for a minute. And there are always people who are caught in the middle for a minute. I feel really, really bad for the parents of high school students who were in high school from the day after COVID until now. Because that was the time when we were figuring out how to do phones in schools. And it sucked. We did it badly. You were right to feel like that went badly. But we are now well on our way to figuring it out. We will figure it out. So I think the normal thing to say is there will be disruptions. And you are not crazy to feel disrupted in your life. But that is not the same thing as disaster, and is not the same thing as losing our humanity, and is certainly not the same thing as the end of the American experiment, which has survived many, 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 many new technologies.
Yeah, the anti-tech people on the right, the thing that I always go back to with this is that they also tend to be hardcore pro-lifers. And so whenever I talk about technology just generally, I just kind of try to remind them that it is because of science and tech that a lot more babies and mothers now survive childbirth. And that's drugs, and that's neonatal intensive care units, that is advances in medical technology. In 1900, I looked this up before the pod, in at least some U.S. cities, infant mortality was 30%. 30% of infants died before their first first birthday. And so there's a stat from the CDC that basically says that if we had that level of infant mortality in the late 1990s, which is, 25, 30 years ago at this point, right? An estimated 500,000 live-born infants would have died before age 1. And so this is about keeping babies alive, among other things. And, a lot of Hawley's...
They're willing to pay that cost. I mean, that's
do you think
part
so?
of... Yeah, I think so. And it's partly because this is always nostalgic in the way, Catherine or whoever was talking about how like Uber is okay now, but Uber when it happened was, the end of the American dream for cab drivers and things like that.
Well, they're not willing to go back. They just want stasis, right?
Yeah, but I mean, this is this puts the lie to what the National Conservative Project is. And, the other senator from Missouri, Eric Schmidt, also spoke at that conference. And he went on a long tear about how, the real Americans are the people like his ancestors who moved from, the East Coast to Missouri in the 1840s and things like that. And that the real Americans were people who were descended from Scots, Irish, and German people. 150 years ago or 200 years ago. There is a project in conservatism of all stripes, but especially in the National Conservative, to lionize the recent past or the last moment when you felt you were on top of the world. And, that is a big part of it. That's why they're anti-tariff. That's why they're anti-trade. That's why they're anti-tech. That's why they're anti any kind of change. They will get used to it in 15 or 20 or 25 years, and then they'll start embracing something that was radically disruptive in the day. And, we need to understand why people feel like that, and we need to help people kind of modulate and moderate through disruption. But it cannot be taken seriously, especially from a libertarian point of view. Free minds and free markets are the enemy of conservatism. And this goes back to Hayek talking in at the end of the Constitution of Liberty, that it is not a political program to try and act as an anchor and not let anything change. That way, it's a terrible method. The good thing that you can say about it is that all of these guys are, they're doing a performative contradiction, because none of them go to the hospital and say, you know what, give me the insulin from 25 years ago. Give me the ICU units, from 25 years ago or anything like that. So,
well, at least some of them are deciding not to vaccinate their kids, not to take certain medicines.
But none of them are deciding not to use social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they are restricting their kids from using social media, although there was a great, I don't have it in front of me, but Josh Hawley just had one of the all-timers, maybe it was a decade ago or so, where it was like, Facebook is the new public square. They decide what you can say. They limit, they're the only way you can get your message out. We basically, I don't know if he used the word public utility, but he said we need public control of the social media infrastructure because that's the only way you can speak. And of course, he posted that message on Twitter.
Part of what he said in this speech is that these tech companies control what you can say. And it's like, no, actually, all the power doesn't flow in this one direction. And the ability to speak is key among that. I mean, institutional media, as we've talked about a lot, used to have a lot more power than it does today. And individual citizens have a lot more power than they used to before. And that is because of technology. So he's got it exactly backwards. And he also has it backwards when he says that the only thing AI is going to do is going to entrench those who already have all the power. Like, my dude. Look at any list of the top, 30, 20, 10 companies in America. Compare it now to, 25 years ago and 50 years ago, and keep doing that. Nick and I did that in a book called The Declaration of Independence, How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America. I usually don't plug that. So, I get extra credit for that.
Drink twice.
We have a dynamic economy precisely because of technology, and technology upends entrenched interests. That is kind of the entire point of it. He's pretending as if this is just going to keep JP Morgan even more rich than before, when in fact it's going to upend today's Zuckerbergs eventually. Let's hope.
Just speaking of books by Libertarian magazine editors, Virginia Postrel's The Future and Its Enemies is always relevant for discussions like this. I mean, she was writing about this in the 1990s, but the future is here, and Josh Hawley is its enemy. But I actually want to finish this conversation by talking about another group of people, because NatCon was not the only factional conference held in Washington, D.C. last week. There was another conference from your favorite people, Matt Welch. The Abundance Agenda, folks. It was called Abundance 2025. And there was a bipartisan coalition of writers and thinkers and policymakers. And like their whole deal was basically, we're going to reject the anti-tech horseshoe. We're going to be the other horseshoe. And their message was basically the opposite of what you heard at NatCon, that technology is good. We need to build more of it. We need to improve our economy so we can do bigger and better things. They were pro-future. And so, Matt, I just want to, what do you think about this kind of emerging non-left and right dichotomy between the people who are for the future and they're kind of centrist, center-left in many cases, but not always. There were a bunch of Republicans at the Abundance Conference and a bunch of people who sort of associate with the right. And then you have this kind of MAGA leftist coalition of people who are against the future.
I wish I had my hobo gloves handy, because I would point over there and say, that's bait. But in the absence of that, again, because I haven't said it enough, apparently, in this podcast, very, very interesting, this project of people writing books and having conferences. And call me when it's translated into a major party politics that says, you know what, we need to have right to work states. We need to make sure that people have absolutely free labor as they go about their business, and here's our local, our city or state government that is acting on those initiatives. Maybe it'll happen. I root for it to happen, and until then, that's bait.
Okay, so look, I agree the Abundance Agenda folks have issues. Like, they do a bunch of stuff that I don't agree with, right? They have not yet translated their political program into a kind of party agenda, but that's actually part of what I like about them, is that they are trying to work in a kind of cross-partisan way on single-issue bills, especially at the state level, right? They're just trying to achieve wins, not like looking to do party coalition management. And that's a libertarian way of thinking about politics, is let's just go to the place where a policy can be changed and make it a little better, and not worry about whether this benefits Democrats, not worry about whether this benefits Republicans. I do think there are some Abundance Agenda folks who are just in it to benefit Democrats. Like, that is a real thing. At the same time, if they're supporting bills that make things better, then that's good. And we don't need to worry about the kind of coalitional partisan stuff, because we're not interested in the parties. We're interested in improving the lives of actual people here. All right, let's move on from this here. I know Matt wants to talk about the Abundance Agenda for the rest of the hour, but we have some other things to talk about here. But first, do you like great debates? Then I want you to check out the next Reason Versus, which is a debate series that pits reason versus other folks in a battle of big ideas. On October 2nd, Reason is taking on National Review. That's not the National Review. And the resolution is: mass immigration is good for America. Your Reason friends, Katherine Mangu-Ward and Alex Nauresta, think mass immigration is good for America. Rich Lowry and Ramesh Ponnuru from National Review will argue that it isn't. I will be the moderator. This debate will be held at Hook Hall in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, October 2nd. For more information, go to reason.com/events. That's reason.com/events. Okay, let's move on and check in on Trump's economy. About a month ago, Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics after a weak jobs report, but now there is another jobs report, and that one isn't so great either. Matt Welch, do you want to give us a rundown here, the lowlights, highlights?
Yeah, it came out Thursday. The jobs report for August was that there was just only 22,000 jobs created. They also revised the June and July numbers, and the June one got into negative territory, like negative 13,000 jobs. We now have more unemployed people, or people who are classified as being unemployed. That's different than the actual number of unemployed people. Unemployed meaning that they're actively searching for a job. There's more of those people than there are jobs, which is not a great number to have. The unemployment rate's at 4.3%. It's the highest since 2021. And a lot of people always pounce. Democrats pounce too. This is what they pounce on. And maybe libertarians as well. I try not to get too excited about monthly jobs reports ever, because that's a great sign that you should move out of Washington, D.C. But there are some numbers there that are of particular interest in terms of how does it what does it say about the theory of the case of people like J.D. Vance, like people who are NatCon, people like Donald Trump, who have believed for a long time that, in the words of J.D. Vance talking to the New York Times last year, one of the biggest reasons why we have millions of people who've dropped out of the labor force is illegal immigration. We are undergoing a massive experiment right now, huge. I mean, it's actually, I think, quite underreported how big it is. Of course, we're jacking up tariffs to rates that we haven't seen in 100 years, 90 years. And that's a huge experiment on its own, but also choking off illegal immigration and cracking down on legal immigration as well. So the number of immigrants working either on or off the books has gone way down in 6 months. And so the theory of the case would be, finally, we're going to get these, especially men, but not only, millions of Americans who have stopped looking for work, we're going to get them back in the labor force. It is among the measures that I've been waiting to see, how do we tell whether the tariffs are working or not working as intended? That is the one that for me would say, oh, maybe it's working better than I expected. So what is the labor force participation rate now compared to 3 months ago, compared to 6 months ago? It's down a little bit. It's not up. The number of native-born Americans working, exactly the same as it was. Now, it's still early. We're just 3 months into total tariff-a-palooza. And more tariffs are going to come later. But you already hear the Trump administration kind of saying, well, we're going to see some of these effects kind of next year, some of these transformations. I would have thought that at least you would have some people who were outside of the labor force, if this theory had been true or is true, saying, okay, I hear that I can now get a job that before I couldn't get. We're seeing no evidence of that yet. I think that has profound potential impacts. And also keep in mind that tariffs themselves are unpopular. People don't like it when America doesn't grow. High prices are unpopular, and all of these things are happening in the run-up to we're getting close to talking about midterm elections. So watching these numbers going forward, I think the reason why the president is very interested in trying to stage manage those numbers as much as humanly possible. But so far, there isn't any evidence that I could see of their theory of the case, about the Orncast theory of the case being true, that if you cut off immigration and you add tariffs, that you're going to lure Americans who have stopped working back into the workforce. Hasn't happened so far.
Well, you're helping the stock market, which is nice, because remember, this was supposed to be the reason we were getting rid of immigrants, and the reason why we were imposing tariffs is because Trump cares about Main Street, not Wall Street. And, subsequent to him actually implementing his policy, what we've seen is a major decline in blue-collar industries, and these are things like manufacturing, construction, mining, logging, oil and gas, transportation, and warehousing. Those numbers are way down. Wall Street is way up. So it's not clear. I mean, I guess, Fortune 500 CEOs were the forgotten man all along, right? This is clearly bad, and there's Trump is going to try and obfuscate. He had Kevin Hassett, his chief economic advisor, go on the Sunday shows to talk about how the BLS data is still really shitty. And it's like they're going to have to fire the next person and the next 10 people. They're probably going to have to shift to the decimal system or something like that, or the metric system, in order to start coming up with numbers that will do their bidding. But going into this, everybody who understands anything about economics says, if you cut immigration, if you raise tariffs, if you screw around with the money supply, you get a shitty economy. And that's exactly what Trump is delivering.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like an anti-abundance agenda. No, the Hassett spinning here is amazing. The quote from an Oval Office event over the weekend: all the indicators are saying that things are really strong. No, they're literally not. The indicators are not saying that. And then he just says, right now we're puzzled about the BLS numbers and looking forward to new leadership there to make it so that the numbers are more reliable. I mean, you fired the last person already. What is yes, there are actual data collection. There are technical issues with the survey methods there, but that's not, I think, what is being complained about. I do know Hassett has talked about the technical issues with the survey, and he does want to fix some of that. But the issue here is that the Trump administration is treating these numbers as political and just like deciding, well, these numbers, we don't like them, and therefore we're going to fire the messenger. But it actually seems like there's something else going on here. Like, I joke it's an anti-abundance agenda, but this is an agenda about cutting us off from the rest of the world, right, Catherine? I mean, this is tariffs, which make it harder to do trade, and this is immigration restrictions, which make it harder for people to move across borders. And is this what happens to your economy when you cut your country off, or at least sort of when you kind of build an economic policy wall around your country?
I always like to try and apply an ideological Turing test whenever I can and like do my best version of what is going on. And I think people who support these policies would say, listen, we just want what's best for Americans. They would define Americans as, people that were born here or have been here a long, long time. And I think that they are sort of empirically wrong about what is best for Americans, as these numbers suggest. But even if these numbers were going the opposite direction, or if the stock market numbers were going the opposite direction, or whatever it is, they would still be wrong. And so I think that's kind of the place that I want to put my foot down, I guess, is there's just a theory of the case that if we engage less with the world, if we trade less with the world, and if we let fewer people in, Americans will be better off because they can be left alone to be Americans. And I just think that's a fundamental
Well, look, if you want to steelman this, the argument is for self-reliance. The idea is that if we have to, we have to get vital technology, if we have to get food, if we have to get products that we desperately need, and the only place we can get them is, for example, from China, which is a rival, which is maybe a country that we're going to end up at war with. I certainly do not hope so, but it seems like that's a possibility in the next decade, right? Like, if that is going to be the case, then you don't want to be relying on rivals and potential military adversaries for vital goods. That, to me, seems like if you push them on it, that's where they go with the argument.
I think there's that piece of it, but I do think there's this other piece of it, which is kind of protecting our culture and what it means to be American in addition. And I think the national security arguments tend to have always been oddly persuasive in the American discourse. Like, people are just like, yeah, we got to make our own steel or else everything bad. I don't know that I can make a dent in those, but I guess I would like to try and make a dent in the part of the argument that says, like, there's something special about being American that is under threat when we trade a lot and let people in. And I think the thing that is special about being American is so directly tied to our long history of doing both of those things that's a misunderstanding.
I don't identify as I identify as being more of special, like as a Floridian, which is a good transition to our next story here, because I want to talk about what's going on at New College of Florida. You guys remember in 2023, it became the focus of a bunch of like state efforts to weed out diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher ed. You had Governor Ron DeSantis, the urging of anti-DEI activists like Chris Rufo. He killed all those programs. He started recruiting student athletes. This was part of the anti-DEI program, was more student sports. And then he also replaced a bunch of the school's top leadership, including, I think, the board, a bunch of people on the board. I believe Chris Rufo ended up in a leadership position at New College. And so there's now this kind of interesting thing that has happened after a couple of years, which is that someone who worked with leadership as the school's vice president of strategy and special projects for a couple of years, he has a new plan for New College, and it's to take the school private. So the Sarasota Herald Tribune reports that his experience inside the project left him disillusioned and convinced that the college's future is not secure under the current administration or state control. And he told the Suncoast Searchlight, the college has one fickle benefactor, and that's Tallahassee, which for people who don't live in Florida and never have lived in Florida, that's the state capital. The minute that the benefactor decides it doesn't want to spend this kind of money on the college, what does that college do? So, Nick, is this the funniest possible outcome?
Well, New College started as a private school, private college, and it actually had Arnold Toynbee as one of its first faculty members, the famous historian and whatnot. It became a state institution in 1975. Tulane is the one great example of a state school that then became a private university back in the 19th century in Louisiana. That would be great. But the thing about New College to remember is this is a school that has about 700 undergrads. It is a minor school that tells us almost nothing about anything anywhere, even in Florida. But the state legislature, after it got taken over by, the DeSantis and the Rufonians and whatnot, it got $400 million in state grants and things like that. And now they're saying, what we really need to do is go private. Because oddly, when you have a small failing liberal arts college and you decide the way forward is to beef up the soccer team, it probably doesn't work out that well. This to me is an example of how many of the concerns that, kind of conservative activists have about higher education are fake. They're not actually about changing or fixing or creating great universities that everybody in the world wants to come to and we allow them to come to. It really is to score cheap ideological points. And the fact is nobody who took over New College was serious about running it well. They were using it to score a couple of ideological points, line their pockets, and then, oddly, they lose interest. So it is funny. I mean, to your original point, it's kind of hilarious and it's kind of sad.
I mean, this just connects all the things we've been talking about already, which is, Catherine's point about the tariffs and immigration is, well, they want it because it allows us to be more true to the soul of America. And Josh Hawley doesn't like self-driving cars because, they're sort of putting people out of work, and work is the fundamental American dignity. And the labor activists also talk about, how you can't teach a self-driving car empathy, right? It's all just culture war all the way down. Matt, I actually want to ask you about this because Nick is kind of skeptical here. I think when we talked about this on the podcast a couple of years ago, there was some kind of none of us are big proponents of DEI in higher education. None of us think those programs are just awesome. At the same time, we were just is this really the right vehicle for changing higher ed and for getting rid of kind of toxic wokeness in the public education system? And yet you look at something like this, does it suggest maybe a little bit somehow that the Rufoing actually kind of worked?
I don't know enough about the specific case of it. It does suggest to me that this is the future, whether we like it or not, just because
Josh Hawley does not like it.
Well, I don't know. I'm not as omniscient as perhaps I should be about Josh Hawley's secret desires. But
no, I just mean he doesn't like the future. Obviously, he's going to like the Rufoing.
At any rate, no, we can't agree as a country anymore, generally speaking, especially on the federal level, about shared institutions. So the extent to which there's going to be state schools, I mean, the University of California, which has been at various times, the pride of California. At some point, is that going to remain tenable as people fight over? Probably will, because California has still has a kind of a monoculture of democratic governance, even though it hasn't really been delivering very well for the people of California for a long time. But people can't agree on things. They're going to use whatever are the shared institutions, the state institutions, the allegedly neutral institutions, even if they don't have a ton of government backing. They're just going to fight over them forever. They're going to say that either it's been captured by this team or it's being abused by that team. We're not going to be able to agree on it. As we get a lower and lower trust society, these types of fights are going to be inevitable. And you're going to see more talk about privatization on left and right as a result of those things. And that's also true for K through 12 schools. I do have some sympathy for the Rufoian analysis. much more than I do Rufonian. Is that the phrase that Nick coined? Because I like it. Tactics, which is to say that their analysis is that these institutions will never reform themselves. They are so overwhelmingly lopsided in this one direction that we have to use a blunt force object. Catherine, is there a blunt force object in Gilgamesh that we can use maybe to just sort of like knock heads into these institutions, because all of your polite kind of, using litigation and other kind of threats and public pressure didn't work. I think that there's something about that analysis that those of us who don't like the tactics should take more seriously. We've long observed that a lot of places, especially sort of elite Ivy League school, which is not at all a major percentage of actual higher education in this country, are captured. They're lopsidedly ideological in a lot of different places, including in like STEM sciences and stuff. It's kind of crazy. And, I can understand that people have felt a sense of impatience about all of that. But for me, that's not enough to go in there and start using the government as a battering ram and seeing what the Trump administration is doing, which is literally trying to punish its enemies in higher education and doing it in such a way that is suppressing freedom of speech. That's not the way. It's never going to be the way. It's going to backfire. So I'm of a mixed opinion about all of it, but I'm afraid that this is going to be our future for a while.
If I may, just in the context of Florida, though, over the past 50 years, the flagship school in Florida, the University of Florida, it's a state-supported school. It went from being academically basically a joke, the place that Gatorade was invented, and a frankly mediocre sports school, to an excellent sports school, but an even better academic school, where it's now always in the top, certainly in the top 10 or 25 of state universities, but just of national universities. So at the same time that people like Rufo are talking about how, higher education has just become so awful, et cetera, people in Florida and people around the country have said, oh, you know what? The main school in Florida, the flagship research school, has become a leading national university. So, as somebody, I don't like DEI. I don't like wokeness. I have 3 degrees, or actually more than 3 degrees, from 3 state institutions. I I went through fucking an English PhD program in the 80s and 90s where people were unbelievably politically correct and hostile, not just to my character, but to my ideology, which are the scars that sting. It's much more complicated than just saying, oh, you know what, the universities are terrible, et cetera, because inevitably the best universities are also the most woke. And they're the places where the sons and daughters of conservative legislators and millionaires send their kids. We're having a fake conversation when we're simply saying that universities are terrible and we need to get rid of New College in Florida, because that's the tip of the spear. It's a joke, and it's not intellectually serious. And if you don't want to fund higher education with the public dollar, that's an argument to have. But then to be starting to noodle around this kind of stuff in order to score culture war points, it's just not a serious conversation.
Just to follow up on Matt's point about how California politicians are not delivering for their people, I just want to note, who makes that argument kind of fundamental to their project? The abundance folks. That's kind of what what they're all about. They just keep saying Democratic politicians not delivering. And that is, in fact, a problem. It's a problem for Democrats, but it's also just a problem for people who want a better world and a better economy and better education. And in fact, the guy who wants to privatize New College doesn't just say, well, it's a funding issue. He also says this might help us take care of some of our kind of education policy issues with test scores, things like that. Catherine, anything you want to add here really quickly?
Privatize everything. Thank you.
All right. Follow-up question. How have you been sleeping?
Oh, thank you so much for asking, Peter. I have been sleeping very well thanks to a new mattress that I received. So this is, for those of you who have been following the saga, a few weeks ago, I was about to buy a mattress when we got a note from the folks at Brooklyn Bedding who offered us one to try. It took me a while to get home to my mattress from vacation. It was a horrible wait. And when I got home, it was waiting for me in a box When I opened the box, it did that cool mail order mattress thing where it like inflated and was gigantic. And I got the Aurora Luxe cooling mattress. It is indeed luxe and cooling. It's delightful. And I will be reporting more on my mattress. But I have to say, I'm not just saying this because I'm a podcast ad for a mattress, although I am also saying this because I'm a podcast ad for a mattress. It's pretty good. So you should go to brooklynbedding.com and use the promo code REASON to get 30% at checkout. brooklynbedding.com. 30% off with your promo code REASON. Did I sound like a real podcaster doing that ad for a mattress?
Thank you to our very own mattress girl. Let's go to our listener question. Comes from Tommy, who writes, I have never identified as a libertarian, but I've been listening to your podcast every Monday for the last 3 to 4 years. Thank you so much, Tommy. The 4 of you have provided reliably sane political commentary and a few good laughs each week to the point where I can identify as libertarian curious. So how did each of you come to identify as a libertarian, and or why is that a significant identification for you? Nick Gillespie, Mr. Libertarian. Let's start with you.
Dr. Libertarian, thank you.
Sorry, apologies.
For God's
Did you
sake.
hear about all those degrees?
Yeah.
So how did you come to identify as a libertarian, Nick? And why is it important?
Counting his degrees. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which degree is from the Institute of Libertarianology. For me, it was primarily through reading Reason magazine. My brother, who went to college and like me and before me went to Rutgers, was an economics major, which is what Milton Friedman was at Rutgers back in the 20s or early 30s. The economics department was used to be housed in his old dorm. He discovered Reason magazine in college and he started reading it and he shared it with me. And I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. This makes a lot of sense. And this would have been in the very late 70s, early 80s. And then the next two big steps on the way were I became a reporter after I graduated from college, and I got stuck going to like high school graduations and zoning and planning board meetings. And I would be driven insane by the way that these planning commissions and zoning commissions would rake like just regular householders over the coals because they had, the one story that always stuck with me was a guy had put a fence, like an 18-inch fence, a cosmetic fence around his property, and he didn't realize that he needed a permit. This was in central New Jersey. And they like just raked him over the coals for 20 or 30 minutes. Who are you to think you can just do whatever you want with your property? And I was like, well, are you like fucking kidding? Where are we? And then they said, okay, you have to apply for the permits, pay a fine, and then move the fence in like 6 or 12 inches from where it was. And that made me realize like, okay, I am fully libertarian. And then going to grad school, I realized I'm not a conservative, I'm not a liberal, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a libertarian. Small L, and I usually vote big L.
Matt Welch, what about you? And do you define yourself as a libertarian?
Small L, Tommy. He had a capital L in the letter. So I always was, was born and raised in the Southern California aerospace belt. So I've hated commies since I was in diapers. And that hasn't dulled even a little bit over time. And then in high school, started reading a lot of new journalism and being very wowed and under the sway of kind of the anti-authoritarian 60s and 70s left, Tom Wolfe, Hunter Thompson et al. My libertarian stepdad tried to introduce me to Ayn Rand, and when I threw that against a wall, he more successfully got me into Heinlein. I can never pronounce his last name right, and gobbled that stuff up. And then I moved to Central Europe for 8 years right after the collapse of communism, and became very much enthralled with the works, especially of Václav Havel. Again, very anti-authoritarian, very anti-communist, very individualistic. And then, moved back to this country and realized that whatever I described my politics, no one understood any of it, and that the best shorthand for it was libertarian. So eventually I allowed myself to be described as such and realized that I am one.
Yeah, my story is sort of a synthesis of these two. I discovered Reason in 2004 when I was working at a Books A Million, Remember the Books A Million, right? It was like a Barnes & Noble, except much bigger. And in particular, they had a huge, like they advertised themselves as having a gigantic periodicals section back when newsstand magazines were still a thing. And that was the year that Reason published the famous I Know Where You Live cover story, which went to every subscriber with a personalized photo of their house, or at least whatever was at their address. And that was just amazing to me. It sounded like something out of science fiction, which of course I was a big fan of. And so I quickly became a regular reader of the blog, Hit and Run, Rest in Power, worked at Competitive Enterprise Institute right out of college, a libertarian think tank that focuses on regulation. So I learned a lot about domestic economic policy, and that's partly why I kind of like the abundance folks, is because the abundance folks are doing something. Yeah, mainly also because of the facial reactions from Matt Welch. If you are not watching this on YouTube, just incredible. But like the CEI, Fred Smith, was talking about the dangers of overregulation and just focusing on this at a time when no one else was. And so I got to know some of the folks at Reason. I just kind of surveyed the DC political scene in my first year out of college. And I took a look at the right and I took a look at the left. I worked at National Review very briefly, and I looked at this binary and I was just like, I don't care for it. And I had that special tingly feeling you get when you realize at some point in your life what you really are. And what I realized was I'm neither of those things. I'm something that isn't captured by the two-party left-right binary. And that's what Reason is. And that's what it means to me. The other version of this story is just, as a kid, I was into science fiction and the history of magic. And I like the chances that Harry Houdini nerd, who also really has strong opinions about the factional debates that went on in the Futurians in Brooklyn in the 1940s, like that guy is going to turn out to be a libertarian. It's statistically improbable that that guy does not. Katherine, how'd you become that guy?
Ayn Rand did it to me. But I will say, when I was a insufferable teenage objectivist, I did not think of myself as a libertarian, just as Rand herself did not think of herself as a libertarian. She and I were above all that in those years, really philosophers. Thank you very much. And it wasn't until I got to college and met a whole bunch of sort of former or soft objectivists who gently said to me, please consider reading another book. And I did. And,
was it Harry Potter?
It was. They didn't have Harry Potter then. And I did read a few other books, which led me to libertarianism and just in general the study of economics and history. And perhaps most importantly for me, right at the beginning there, Adam Smith, who is I think a good second course after a rousing and spicy appetizer of Ayn Rand.
Oh, I like this idea of libertarian philosopher pairings. Like what's the ordering, but also what goes with?
I mean, you got to have port with your Smith, I think, because he's got that great.
So what do you inject with Robert Nozick?
Yeah. I do unfortunately think
that's a question for you, Nick.
Yeah.
This requires my before dinner
control.
cocktail to be a White Russian, probably.
Oh, yeah.
We're starting with Rand, which is dark times for everyone.
All right. Speaking of dark times, let's go to our last topic here. Trump's Justice Department is reportedly considering a regulation aimed at disarming, quote, mentally ill individuals suffering from gender dysphoria. So this is not an official policy yet, but there are multiple outlets that have reported on this, confirmed that it's at least being discussed. Katherine, is there any way that a ban on gun ownership for people who identify as trans is remotely legal or constitutional?
No, for exactly the same reason that red flag laws are a bad idea and are also not constitutional. Reason has written a ton about this. Jacob Sullum has written a ton about this. And sometimes our friends, even some friends on the right, like David French et al., have been pretty squishy on this issue and said maybe red flag laws are a good idea. This is, of course, the laws which allow sort of a variety of mechanisms to either prohibit the purchase of or to confiscate the firearms of people with mental illness or sometimes with domestic violence records. Taking away people's guns because of the way that they are is not cool, and we shouldn't do that. And this is true whether or not you think being transgender is a mental illness. I don't. But even if you do, this is a dangerous road to go down, and one that we speaking of the horseshoe, people on the left and people on the right want to do this for each their own motivations. And I now and always would suggest a truce in which we leave each other alone.
Yeah, Nick, on the horseshoe aspect of this, conservatives spent the last week arguing that comedian Graham Linehan, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, should not be arrested in the UK for making a crude joke or a mean remark or whatever you want to call it about trans people, right? A tweet, right? And there's some people who are just like, this is a cruel remark. And some people are like, oh, it's just a joke, maybe kind of mean-spirited, but whatever it is you want to call it, right? And their argument was, whether you like it or not, people have or should have fundamental rights like freedom of speech. And that means even the stuff you don't like has to be protected. Now, that right obviously doesn't exist in the UK, but like in some ways, this is correct. It is sort of an argument for the rights that people should have. And then you see the Trump administration. They are trying to strip a fundamental, actually constitutionally protected right from certain people here in the United States. So we're talking before about what makes libertarians different. And I think this is a big part of it. And it is that desire for legal and procedural and constitutional consistency. I mean, Is that right? Do you
yes,
see that here?
You're absolutely right. And I'll point out, nobody should be arrested for tweets. The UK is going down its own crapper, that I don't think we need to dwell on, but we need to make sure it does not infect American legal discourse and things like that. But nobody, unless it's an actual incitement or a death threat that is imminent, nobody should go to jail for tweets. By the same token, nobody should have their rights stripped because one member of a group, however defined, acts poorly. That's just insane, particularly of constitutional rights. This is disturbing to me beyond any of the immediates, because it also signals that what the Trump administration is doing is playing culture war games where they went from saying with actual reasons that the idea that children are being transitioned is dubious medicine, or at public schools or at schools where kids might be transitioned without the knowledge of their parents, this is messed up and this should not be allowed, to now starting to chip away at the autonomy and the rights of trans people and kind of equating anybody who becomes transgender with a mental illness serious enough to take away the thing. I mean, I guess, there was a time when Donald Trump welcomed Caitlyn Jenner into the Republican Party. He said, they'd be happy to have her and she could use whatever toilet she wanted in his, vast mansions and at Mar-a-Lago and stuff like that. I suppose now he would be arguing that, because Caitlyn Jenner killed somebody in a vehicular, accident, that all trans people, or all trans women anyway, should not be allowed to drive. This is bad, awful stuff. And it shows that conservatives, or at least MAGA Republicans or the Trump administration, cannot be trusted with our rights. We have to remember as libertarians, as Americans, that our rights only exist to the extent that we demand and insist on them and exercise them regardless of what the powers that be are doing.
Matt, the trans issue has become a kind of bugaboo or a fixture in the headlines for a certain part of the right. I mean, particularly the sort of people who go to NatCon, but even just a lot of the people who are very frustrated with, say, mainstream media coverage of everything, right? This is a major front in the culture war. And you sometimes interact with that part of the right. How do they see this sort of proposal? I mean, is there a kind of a steelman case from the other side, or even just a kind of way of understanding psychologically what it is that, that they're getting at here?
I mean, I probably know a couple of people or interact with a couple of people publicly who will say something like, there is no such thing as a trans person, and that, trans is a mental illness. I think that is a minority of an opinion. And I think it illustrates the virtues of having, quite unlike the United Kingdom, not just a constitutional republic, but our constitutional republic, because precisely because it is a bulwark against, not in a bad publication way, but in an actual way, of of protecting people against the momentary enthusiasms of a majority that wants to deprive people of rights. That's it. Full stop. Like, it is a glorious way to protect minorities in general, and to vindicate their full rights as Americans. And so, so much of Trumpism, and again, sort of applied, interpreted Trumpism has been, okay, can we find a class of people that we can all agree are beyond the pale? Let's go there. Let's bomb their boats out of international water. Let's deport them. Let's do this. Let's do that. They will certainly not be able to have the same kind of constitutional rights. You see this across the board, right? Like this. Why, my God, this international student was in a pro-Palestinian march, so therefore their freedom of speech should not be allowed. Marco Rubio's on a spree about this kind of stuff. So it fits in with this instinct among Trumpites. And Trump himself, when he first began, he advertised himself. We did a cover story about this in 2016, maybe even 2015, called Trump Against the Constitution, where Damon Root was talking about this in terms both of birthright citizenship, that's guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, interpretations thereof, but also Kelo versus New London. Right? Everyone agreed that was terrible except Donald Trump. And for a hot minute at the beginning of his modern political career, there was a lot of people on the right like, ooh, that's bad. We should talk him out of that. Well, you didn't, because he saw this as a button to push to get something done. And once you untether these notions, these sort of like consistent ideological, philosophical notions of protecting individuals against a state that has decided it wants to do something, then bets will continue to be thrown off. And this is the latest bet that has been, it's just trial balloon for now, and it won't really go anywhere, I don't think, because it'll be stopped by the courts, I do think. But the idea that it was trial ballooned at all and that there's going to be some audience for that is a real, I think, advertisement against this modern version of whatever the Republican ideology is these days. It is not tethered in philosophical constitutional rights that protect unpopular minorities. It is the opposite of that, and it should be rejected with a full throat.
If I may, culturally, I think what this also represents or gets at the psychology of a kind of MAGA conservative, a certain type, because there are many varieties, but there is a discomfort with the ability of people to change and to shift and to modify themselves in ways they see fit. And trans people represent a psychic, extinction to people who are, no, there can only be male and female, and the way that men and women present have to be in rigidly traditional, conventional ways. Trans stuff, and it goes to somebody like Josh Hawley because it is technological as well as psychological. It is creative destruction on a kind of subatomic level, and it scares the shit out of them. It's also one of the reasons why among the national conservatives, certainly, there is an emphasis on something approaching blood and soil American identity. You can't have birthright citizenship because then you're letting in the wrong people. The only people who are true Americans are those who look like my ancestors did, things like that. This is a very, on a certain level, it is an understandable kind of sensibility, but it's also one that stands in opposition to everything that has made America great, both culturally as well as economically, in cuisine and everything about us. It's all about hybridization, mongrelization, shape-shifting, and figuring out who you are and how you become that person, and then what happens next, and building new institutions and new societies that are expansive, merciful, and inclusive.
Peter, if I can quickly add, because you asked to give voice to people who have concerns about trans issues. I think most of the concerns are on the edge, are on the lines of like, hey, my kid's going to elementary school. Why do they have to declare their pronouns? Why is there this gender neutral bathroom, again, at my elementary school? I'm just talking about, around me in this world. Malcolm Gladwell, great New Yorker writer, maybe put that in air quotes, a few days ago said, well, actually, I was cowed into saying things I didn't believe about the participation of trans women, people born as male in swimming contests because I was worried that I was going to get messed up. There's a lot of spaces that people live in and have observed where in a very short period of time, it felt like we're disrupting language and we're sort of putting people on the spot. You must completely agree with this or else you're a monster. People react against that. And I think they're right to react against that. The question is, do you react against that in such a way where you're depriving adults of rights based on some kind of loony interpretation? That's where I think it's going to end up being a non-starter.
Yeah, you said that you didn't think that this would go anywhere. And in some ways, I think that's probably correct if I had to bet. At the same time, look back at the social media law in Florida. Look at a bunch of things that Florida and Texas have done where they passed laws knowing full well that they were unconstitutional. The point wasn't to pass a constitutional law and then it was, sure, if they would have been happy if these things would have, gone through. But the point was just to pass the law and say, this is what we stand for, and then let it get struck down in the courts. And I guess I am not going to make a prediction here, but I can see that happening with something like this. All right, I am going to push the next segment button here. And start with Katherine. What have you been watching, reading, otherwise consuming in the cultural arena this week?
One reason I'm so mad at Josh Hawley for rolling up with his bad interpretation of the Epic of Gilgamesh is because I am currently reading a history of Mesopotamia. I'm in my Sumerian era, and everyone is welcome to join me. The book is called Between Two Rivers. It's by Moody al-Rashid. And it is very good. It's this kind of like personalized historical story. It takes a bunch of different artifacts and walks you through everyday life in the ancient world between the Tigris and Euphrates, the two rivers in question. Here's the thing, though. If you think that AI is maybe going to change society, I invite you to consider living in a society where they invented writing. I invite you to consider living in a society where I invented the wheel. Like, it is the most human thing in the world to invent some wild new technology and in so doing radically change what it means to be human. And there is nowhere that is more obviously true than in ancient Mesopotamia, in the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, where he tries to transcend being human because that's what humans do, man. All of our founding myths, all of our kind of deep stories are about eating the apple and flying too close to the sun and all that stuff. This book does a pretty good job of capturing some of that. It's a little like fluffy, maybe overly focused on the common man type history, but I thought it was a very well done version of that thing. Between Two Rivers, Ancient Mesopotamia and the Birth of History. I recommend it.
Did writing put the sing-songy, like remember a long poem guys out of business?
Yes, that's the story of writing. There's a very elaborate negotiation for some produce and a very fancy artifact of some kind, and a dude has to run back and forth to describe the exact kind of tribute that will be paid on one side and the artifact that will be produced by the other. And eventually, it's just too much to remember, and so writing.
Wow. Yeah, I bet those sing-songy remember a long poem guys, their guild was really mad because writing doesn't have a soul, you know? You can't teach it.
How can we conduct negotiations from these clay tablets, they wondered.
All right. Nick Gillespie, what do you have for us?
I have been reading Henry Jenkins, who's a media critic and social theorist at USC, called Where the Wild Things Were, Boyhood and Permissive Parenting in Post-War America. It is a fantastic cultural study of kind of what it was like to be a boy in post-war America, and the different texts, everything from, TV shows like Leave It to Beaver to comic strips like Dennis the Menace to Johnny Quest, how they kind of conceived of what it was like to be a boy in America. It's fascinating. Henry Jenkins has written a series of great books. The first time I encountered him was I don't know, 30 years ago. He wrote a book called Textual Poaching, which is about fan and community participatory culture, he called it, which was absolutely monumental in my thinking. And he talked about how mass media is never something that is just kind of broadcast down from on high and then is uncritically received by audiences, but rather it's something that we participate in the meaning of. And then he talked about that in kind of early primitive stages of fan culture. Where the Wild Things Were is fantastic, because if you are interested in why American kids are coddled or anxious or anything like that, that's the anime. This is the manga. Read about what was going on in post-war America and the way that things like Benjamin Spock and other parenting manuals came into play in the popular culture that was created and received. And it is filled with fascinating and dark little kind of vignettes, including Dennis the Menace, which was created by this, by Hank Ketchum, kind of a terrible comic strip turned into a bad sitcom. The actual kid who played Dennis hated his father because his father, among other things, when the mother died of a drug overdose, didn't tell the kid until after she was buried. And then the real life Dennis the Menace went to Vietnam and came home with massive PTSD and was kind of disowned by his father. This is just... a couple of months ago, I talked about Chaos, a book about the Manson family and a kind of thick, weird history of the 60s and counterculture. This is like that from a scholarly angle about virtually every text that you can think about that polluted the Saturday morning cartoon shows and afternoon reruns. So I really highly recommend Where the Wild Things Were. It not only explains what the past was, but it helps illuminate what the present is.
Speaking of the present and the past, in New York City, I watched Highest to Lowest. It is the latest movie from Spike Lee, the latest Spike Lee joint, and it is a remake of the great old Kurosawa thriller High and Low, but it's been translated, so it's now set in contemporary New York City. So this movie, I understand, is maybe not going to be to the taste of every Reason Roundtable listener because it is full of the political and cultural obsessions of Spike Lee. And there's like a scene with a giant Kamala Harris poster just looming in the background of a conversation, right? It's like, and there's other times when it sort of feels like it's channeling a Josh Hawley speech. There's a whole bit at the very beginning about how AI is bad and it doesn't understand the soul of music. This movie is set in a kind of contemporary hip hop company. But it's great. It's just great. And I think if you love movies and you love great acting, you will appreciate this movie because, folks, this has Denzel Washington in it. And he is so electric to watch. I mean, maybe now more so than ever. I wish I loved anything in the world as much as Denzel Washington loves to say words. Like I could watch him read a CBO report into a Radio Shack microphone, and I would be so happy. If he were just like reading the monthly jobs report to me, my life would be so much better. He is just so electric and so amazing. He owns every scene in this movie. And in this film, he kind of starts with this very cranky old man view of the world, a kind of Josh Hawley-ish sort of view about like how AI and social media, it's ruining everything. And the movie just becomes this extended argument for artistic excellence and integrity and the importance of having like a unique personal voice and vision. And it's kind of positioned against a world in which social media and AI prohibit that. And it wouldn't work except for the fact that the movie itself is pretty electrifying and Denzel Washington is really great. It all comes to a head. The end of this movie is this, not the very final scene, but there's the climax of this film is the single best scene I have seen in any movie this year. I won't spoil it for everyone, but I'll just say that our hero defeats the villain by out-artistic integritying him, by demanding that he as an artist take his art more seriously and just do better as somebody who wants to produce something in the world. And even if you're paying attention, I think that Kamala Harris poster scene that I mentioned earlier, as eye-rolling as it is sort of obvious, you can actually kind of be read as a critique of her campaign, or at least the social media first politics that she practiced. I mean, there was this criticism even amongst Democrats that said basically Kamala Harris, especially in her 2020 campaign, was just way too online. She just couldn't get out of she was not in her own head doing good politics. She was just listening to the mob, and that made her a worse politician. This is a fascinating hell of a movie. Just a real cinema head film. I can't recommend it strongly enough. Probably not for everyone, but man, it's really good. All right, what else do we got here?
That's another fine way of saying, "Hey, Matt."
Yeah, hey, Matt.
So,
what else do we got here? I don't know.
Yeah, we got another recommendation from one Matt Welch.
If ever you find yourself in the fine port town of Halifax, Nova Scotia, which, spoiler alert, is in Canada, I recommend highly going to the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21, which was basically the Canada version of Ellis Island, although the era is different. From about 1928 to 1971, they welcomed in almost 1 million immigrants there. So it's a museum about that history. It's also a place where 500,000 Canadians went basically to fight in World War II, more or less. But it's a history of the people who came in, a lot of war brides, Holocaust survivors, war refugees, displaced people after World War II, Hungarian 56ers too. They didn't really get into the Czechoslovak 68ers, but that was a very important source of a lifeline to dissidents from Central Europe as well. Great little museum. Fun place to take kids. It's very hands-on. You can sort of feel the visceral sense of what it was like to go there, and you end up kind of in the middle of nowhere in Canada. You'd have to take a train to a train to a train to get to wherever the hell you were going. Just a very interesting, colorful museum with a really good tour guide, kind of bringing it all home and giving you a sense of also contemporaneous Canadian immigration politics and policies over the years. Really recommend it. Canadian Museum of Immigration, and Halifax is great. Didn't know anything about it, and super interesting. I
was going to make fun of you, Matt, for this pick, and then I, as you started talking, realized that I went there on my honeymoon. And it is a good museum.
Wow. Did your husband say, "Just the Halifax, ma'am"?
I hate you.
Matt,
I think that's a good place to end.
I was going to ask Matt if that's where American academics leaving Trump's America, do they get processed at
there's
Port 21?
Jason Stanley statue out front. Yeah.
Okay, folks, that is our show this week. Remember, you can come watch Reason, including Katherine Mangu-Ward, this podcast's very own debate national review in Washington, D.C. on October 2nd. Check out the details at reason.com/events. That's reason.com/events. And as always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate, reason.com/donate. Give us your money. Thank you so much for listening. Reason Roundtable will return.